Picture this, a dusty military compound in Afghanistan, 2012. The morning sun cast long shadows across the base as soldiers went about their routines. Then, something unprecedented happened that would send shockwaves through the entire military hierarchy. A SEAL commander, one of the most elite warriors in the U.S. military, stopped in his tracks. His hand slowly rose to his forehead in a crisp salute. Not to a general, not to a decorated officer with years of service medals gleaming on their chest, but to a young woman who wore no rank insignia, no name tag, no visible signs of authority whatsoever. The entire compound fell silent. Hardened soldiers froze mid-conversation. Even the wind seemed to pause as everyone witnessed something that defied every protocol they knew. Who was this mysterious woman? What had she done to earn such unprecedented respect from one of America's most feared warriors? And why was her very existence kept secret from the world? This is her story. A story the military never wanted you to hear. A story of a ghost who walked among giants, earned her place through blood and precision, and changed the face of modern warfare forever, all while the world never knew her name. Some legends are born in the shadows. Some heroes never seek the spotlight. And sometimes, the most powerful salute is given to someone the history books will never mention. Her story begins not with fanfare or ceremony, but in the quiet desperation of a young woman who refused to accept the word impossible. Sarah Mitchell grew up in the small town of Cedar Falls, Iowa, where the biggest excitement was usually the Friday night football games. Her childhood was ordinary in every way except one. She could hit a tin can from 200 yards with her grandfather's old hunting rifle when she was just 12 years old. Her grandfather, a Korean War veteran named William Mitchell, had taught her to shoot in the vast cornfields behind their farmhouse. He never made a big deal about her natural talent, but he noticed how her breathing would steady, her hands would stop shaking, and her world would narrow to just the target when she looked down the scope. William had seen many soldiers in his time, but he had never seen anyone with Sarah's natural instinct for precision shooting. She didn't just hit targets, she seemed to understand them. She could calculate wind patterns, adjust for distance, and compensate for her own heartbeat in ways that took most military snipers years to master. Yet she was just a farm girl from Iowa who helped her mother with the chickens and got average grades in high school. Sarah's parents, Tom and Linda Mitchell, ran a small farm that barely broke even most years. They were good people who believed in hard work, honesty, and taking care of family. When Sarah graduated high school in 2008, the country was in the middle of a financial crisis. College seemed like an impossible dream for a farm family struggling to keep their land. Sarah worked at the local diner, saving every penny she could, but the math was simple. She would never earn enough to afford the education she wanted. That's when she made a decision that would change her life forever. On a cold November morning in 2008, she walked into the Army recruitment office in Waterloo, Iowa. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was used to seeing young people from rural areas looking for a way out of their circumstances, but there was something different about Sarah Mitchell. She didn't seem desperate or lost like many recruits. She had a quiet confidence and spoke about wanting to serve her country, but Rodriguez sensed there was more to her story. During her initial interviews, Sarah never mentioned her shooting ability. She talked about wanting to learn new skills, see the world, and earn money for college through the GI Bill. It wasn't until she was at basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, that anyone discovered what she could do with a rifle. The discovery happened by accident. It was week 6 of basic training, and the recruits were at the rifle range for their first live-fire exercise. Sarah had been an average performer in most aspects of training. She could do the required push-ups, complete the obstacle courses, and follow orders, but nothing about her stood out to the drill sergeants. She was one of only 3 women in her company, and, like many female recruits, she tried to blend in and avoid drawing attention to herself. The standard rifle qualification required hitting targets at distances of 150, 250, and 300 meters using an M16 rifle. Most recruits were nervous about this test because failing meant extra training and possible delays in graduation. Sarah approached her firing position with the same quiet focus she had learned in her grandfather's cornfields. Her first shot hit dead center at 150 meters. The drill sergeant nodded approvingly, a good start. Her second shot hit the exact same spot. By her 5th consecutive perfect shot, other recruits had stopped firing and were watching her. By the time she finished the course with a perfect score, the entire range had gone quiet. Drill Sergeant Martinez had been training recruits for 8 years and had never seen anything like it. Sarah's shots weren't just accurate. They were precise to a degree that suggested either incredible luck or extraordinary skill. After the exercise, he asked her to stay behind. "Where did you learn to shoot like that, Mitchell?" he asked. "My grandfather taught me to hunt, drill sergeant," Sarah replied. Martinez had her repeat the qualification course with a different rifle. Then, again with another rifle that had been giving other recruits trouble. Each time, the results were the same, perfect accuracy that seemed almost supernatural. Word spread quickly through the training cadre. By the end of the week, Sarah found herself being observed by officers she had never seen before. Captain Williams from the marksmanship unit arrived at Fort Leonard Wood specifically to test Sarah's abilities. He had her shoot at distances far beyond the standard qualification requirements. At 500 meters, she hit targets that experienced soldiers struggled with. At 700 meters, she was placing shots with precision that impressed even the range masters. But it was what happened at 1,000 meters that changed everything. Using a standard M16 rifle with basic iron sights, Sarah managed to consistently hit man-sized targets at a distance where most soldiers couldn't even see the target clearly. Captain Williams immediately made a phone call that would alter the course of Sarah's military career. Within 48 hours, she received orders that her basic training company commander had never seen before, orders that came directly from the Pentagon. Sarah's original plan had been to complete basic training, attend advanced individual training for her chosen career field in communications, and then serve her time while earning money for college. Instead, she found herself on a plane to Fort Benning, Georgia, for evaluation by the Army's sniper school. The sniper school at Fort Benning was designed to break people. The dropout rate was over 60%, and most of those who failed were already experienced soldiers with combat experience. Sarah arrived as a private fresh out of basic training, with no combat experience and no advanced military training. To the instructors, she looked like a mistake, someone whose paperwork had gotten mixed up. Master Sergeant David Chun had been running sniper training for 12 years. He had trained Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, and Marine Scout snipers. When he saw Sarah's name on his class roster, he assumed it was a clerical error. No private got sent directly to sniper school from basic training. It just didn't happen. The first week of sniper school was designed to weed out candidates who weren't mentally prepared for the demands of precision shooting. Students were required to maintain perfect stillness for hours while observing target areas through spotting scopes. They had to identify and catalog every detail of complex scenarios while remaining hidden and motionless. Many experienced soldiers failed this phase because they lacked the patience and mental discipline required. Sarah approached these challenges the same way she had approached hunting with her grandfather. She would settle into position and become part of the environment. Her breathing would slow, her mind would clear, and she would enter a state of focused calm that allowed her to observe and process details that others missed. While her classmates struggled with fatigue, cramping, and mental exhaustion, Sarah seemed to enter a zone of perfect concentration. The shooting portions of the course confirmed what Captain Williams had observed at Fort Leonard Wood. Sarah consistently outperformed soldiers who had been shooting professionally for years. But more impressive than her accuracy was her instinctive understanding of environmental factors. She could read wind patterns by watching grass movements hundreds of yards away. She could estimate distances by observing how heat shimmer affected her view of targets. She demonstrated skills that typically took years to develop. Master Sergeant Chun began testing Sarah with scenarios far beyond the standard curriculum. He would have her engage targets at extreme distances in challenging weather conditions. He would require her to make shots after hours of motionless observation when other soldiers were too fatigued to maintain accuracy. Each time, Sarah performed at a level that defied her experience. But what truly set Sarah apart wasn't just her shooting ability, it was her tactical intelligence. During training exercises, she would identify better shooting positions than the ones prescribed in the manual. She would spot opportunities for shots that more experienced soldiers missed. She seemed to have an intuitive understanding of battlefield geometry that couldn't be taught. 3 weeks into the 8-week course, Master Sergeant Chun made a phone call to his commanding officer. Within hours, Sarah found herself being evaluated by personnel she didn't recognize, people in civilian clothes who asked questions that had nothing to do with standard sniper training. They wanted to know about her family, her political beliefs, her personal relationships. They administered psychological tests that lasted for hours. They conducted background investigations that examined every aspect of her life going back to childhood. Sarah began to realize that she was being evaluated for something far beyond standard military service. 2 more weeks passed before she learned what that something was. On a Friday afternoon, after completing a particularly challenging field exercise, Sarah was called to Master Sergeant Chin's office. Sitting across from his desk was a woman in civilian clothes who introduced herself only as Agent Morrison. "Private Mitchell," Agent Morrison said, "you've demonstrated abilities that have attracted attention from some very important people. There are opportunities available to someone with your skills, but they would require a level of commitment and sacrifice that goes far beyond normal military service. These opportunities involve operations that officially don't exist, with units that have no names, in conflicts that are never reported in the news." Sarah listened as Agent Morrison explained that she was being recruited for a program that existed in the shadows of the military structure. She would undergo training that was more intensive than anything she had experienced. She would be asked to operate alone in situations where backup was impossible and failure meant death. If she accepted, her official military record would be altered to hide her true activities. As far as the world would know, she would be just another communications specialist serving in routine assignments. "This isn't a decision you can make lightly," Agent Morrison continued. "Once you enter this program, there's no going back. You won't be able to discuss your real work with family or friends. You'll miss important family events because of missions you can never explain. You'll serve your country in ways that will never be recognized or rewarded publicly. And there's a very real possibility that you could die in service to operations that will never be acknowledged." Sarah thought about her grandfather, about the stories he had told her of his service in Korea. He had always said that the most important service was often the kind that nobody ever heard about. She thought about her parents, struggling to keep their farm afloat, and her dreams of college and a normal life. But she also thought about the feeling she got when she looked through a rifle scope, the sense of purpose and clarity that came when her skills were put to use for something important. She thought about the satisfaction of hitting targets that others couldn't, of solving problems that others found impossible. "I accept," she said. Within 24 hours, Sarah Mitchell disappeared from the official military training system. Her records were altered to show that she had been assigned to a communications unit at Fort Gordon, Georgia. Her family received letters describing her routine training and boring administrative duties. Her high school friends heard that she was stationed somewhere in the southern United States, learning about radio equipment and computer systems. In reality, Sarah was transported to a facility that didn't exist on any official maps, where she would begin a training program designed to turn her natural abilities into weapons of surgical precision. She was about to become something that the military officially denied existed, a female sniper capable of operations that would never appear in any official reports. The young woman from Cedar Falls, Iowa, was about to become a ghost. The facility where Sarah found herself had no name, no address, and officially didn't exist. Located somewhere in the mountains of Colorado, it was accessible only by helicopter and looked more like a high-end corporate retreat than a military installation. The buildings were designed to blend into the natural landscape, and there were no visible signs, flags, or military markings anywhere. Sarah was met by a man who introduced himself simply as Colonel Adams. He was in his late 40s, with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that came from years of operations in harsh environments. His uniform bore no unit patches, rank insignia, or name tags. Everything about him suggested experience with classified operations. "Welcome to nowhere, Mitchell," he said as they walked through hallways lined with unmarked doors. "For the next 6 months, this place will be your entire world. You'll train harder than you've ever trained, learn skills you never knew existed, and be tested in ways that will determine whether you're capable of the kind of work we do." Sarah was assigned to a dormitory room that was Spartan but comfortable. Her roommate was another woman about her age who introduced herself as Kate. Kate had been at the facility for 2 months and was clearly struggling with the training program. She had dark circles under her eyes and moved with the careful precision of someone who was constantly exhausted. "Where are you from?" Sarah asked as she unpacked her few belongings. "I can't tell you that," Kate replied. "We're not supposed to share personal information. The whole point is that we don't exist as individuals anymore. We're just assets being prepared for deployment." Sarah learned that the program had started with 12 candidates, but only 6 remained. The others had either failed to meet the standards or had voluntarily withdrawn when they realized what the training would demand of them. The remaining candidates were all women with specialized skills. Some were expert marksmen like Sarah, others had backgrounds in languages, technology, or intelligence gathering. The training schedule began at 4:30 a.m. and continued until well past midnight. Physical conditioning took place before dawn, with workouts designed to build the kind of endurance needed for extended operations in harsh environments. Sarah found herself running up mountain trails in complete darkness, carrying heavy packs, and navigating by compass alone. The marksmanship training was unlike anything she had experienced at Fort Benning. The instructors, who never gave their real names, pushed her to engage targets at distances she had never attempted. Using rifles equipped with advanced optics, she learned to make shots at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters. But distance was only one challenge. She also had to master shooting in adverse weather conditions, from unstable positions, and under intense time pressure. One exercise required her to hike 12 miles through mountainous terrain, carrying full equipment, and then immediately engage targets at various distances with no time to rest or steady herself. Another exercise involved making precision shots while under simulated enemy fire, with instructors using blank ammunition and explosive charges to create realistic battle conditions. But the most challenging aspect of the marksmanship training was learning to shoot with weapons she had never seen before. The instructors introduced her to sniper rifles from different countries, each with unique characteristics and operating procedures. She learned to use Russian Dragunov rifles, German Mauser systems, and highly modified American weapons that existed only in prototype form. Sarah discovered that her natural shooting ability translated to any weapon system. She could pick up an unfamiliar rifle, spend a few minutes learning its characteristics, and then shoot with the same precision she had always demonstrated. This adaptability impressed her instructors, who had seen many expert marksmen struggle when forced to use unfamiliar equipment. The tactical training was equally intensive. Sarah learned advanced camouflage techniques that went far beyond standard military instruction. She practiced moving through terrain without leaving tracks, hiding in plain sight using natural materials, and maintaining concealment for days at a time. She learned to estimate distances using nothing but her eyes, to read weather patterns by observing cloud formations, and to predict human behavior based on subtle environmental cues. Urban operations training took place in a mock city built within the facility. The buildings were constructed to replicate typical Middle Eastern and Eastern European architecture, complete with realistic interiors and civilian populations played by actors. Sarah learned to operate in crowded urban environments, blending in with civilian populations while maintaining readiness to engage targets at a moment's notice. Language training was conducted by native speakers who had been recruited from various intelligence agencies. Sarah was required to achieve conversational fluency in Arabic and basic proficiency in Farsi, Russian, and several regional dialects. The instruction was intensive, with classes conducted entirely in the target language from the first day. Sarah struggled with the language requirements more than with any other aspect of training. While her shooting skills had always come naturally, learning foreign languages required the kind of memorization and repetition that didn't match her learning style. She spent long hours after the official training day had ended, working with audio recordings and language software. The psychological training was perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the program. Sarah learned techniques for operating under extreme stress, including methods for controlling fear, managing pain, and maintaining focus during life-threatening situations. She was taught to compartmentalize emotions, to function normally while experiencing trauma, and to make life and death decisions with minimal information. One exercise involved being held in simulated captivity for 72 hours while instructors used psychological pressure techniques to attempt to break her resolve. She was deprived of sleep, subjected to loud noises and bright lights, and repeatedly interrogated about fictional mission details. The purpose was to determine whether she could maintain operational security even under torture. Another exercise required her to observe detailed scenarios involving violence and trauma, then immediately perform precision shooting tasks. The instructors wanted to know if she could function effectively after witnessing disturbing events that might occur during real operations. Sarah found these psychological tests more challenging than any physical training. She had grown up in a peaceful environment where the worst violence she had witnessed was hunting accidents. Learning to function normally while experiencing or observing trauma required her to develop mental defenses that felt unnatural. 3 months into the program, Kate disappeared. One morning she simply wasn't there, and when Sarah asked about her, the instructors said only that she had been reassigned. Sarah never learned whether Kate had failed a test, suffered an injury, or decided to quit the program. With Kate's departure, Sarah found herself alone in her dormitory room. The isolation was intentional. The instructors wanted candidates to become comfortable with solitude since many of their future operations would require them to work alone for extended periods. Sarah began to understand that she was being prepared for a type of warfare that existed in the shadows of conventional military operations. She learned about intelligence gathering techniques, sabotage methods, and assassination protocols that were never discussed in standard military training. She studied the organizational structures of terrorist groups, criminal organizations, and hostile intelligence services. The weapons training expanded beyond rifles to include pistols, knives, explosives, and improvised weapons. Sarah learned to kill silently using techniques developed by special operations forces around the world. She practiced with weapons concealed in everyday objects and learned to manufacture explosives from common household materials. Advanced surveillance training taught her to gather intelligence while appearing to be an ordinary civilian. She learned to use hidden cameras, listening devices, and computer hacking tools. She practiced following targets through crowded areas without being detected and learned to recognize when she was being followed. The most specialized training focused on what the instructors called long-range problem-solving. This was a euphemistic way of describing assassination missions that required precise shooting at extreme distances. Sarah learned to plan and execute operations where she would need to eliminate specific targets without being detected or identified. These training scenarios were conducted using detailed models of real locations around the world. Sarah would study satellite imagery, floor plans, and intelligence reports to plan shots that would need to be made from concealed positions hundreds or thousands of meters away from the target. She learned to account for every variable that could affect her shot: wind patterns, temperature changes, humidity levels, and even the rotation of the Earth. As her training progressed, Sarah began to understand why the program had such a high failure rate. The demands weren't just physical or technical, they were psychological and moral. She was being prepared to kill people from distances so great that her targets would never see her coming. She would take lives without warning, without giving her victims any chance to defend themselves or even understand what was happening. During one particularly intense training session, Sarah found herself questioning whether she could actually perform the missions she was being trained for. The instructors seemed to sense her uncertainty because they arranged for her to speak with a program graduate who had returned from operational deployment. The woman, who identified herself only as Agent 7, was in her early 30s and had the kind of controlled composure that suggested extensive combat experience. She met with Sarah during an evening meal and spoke quietly about the realities of their work. "I know what you're thinking," Agent 7 said. "You're wondering if you can actually kill someone who has no idea you exist. You're worried about taking lives from positions of total advantage, where your targets have no chance to fight back." Sarah nodded, surprised that her concerns were so transparent. "I felt the same way during training," Agent 7 continued. "But you need to understand what kind of targets we're given. These aren't soldiers fighting for their country or civilians caught up in conflicts. These are people who plan terrorist attacks against innocent civilians. They organize the trafficking of children. They develop biological weapons intended to kill thousands of people." Agent 7 explained that their missions involved eliminating individuals who posed existential threats, but couldn't be stopped through conventional military or law enforcement action. Their targets operated in countries where U.S. forces couldn't officially operate, or they were protected by diplomatic immunity, or they were hidden within civilian populations where conventional military action would cause massive collateral damage. "We don't take these missions lightly," Agent 7 said. "Every target is thoroughly investigated. We don't act unless there's absolute certainty about what the target has done and what they plan to do. And we only engage targets when no other option exists." Sarah asked about the psychological toll of their work. "It's difficult," Agent 7 admitted. "You'll question every shot you take, even when you know it was necessary. You'll see your targets' faces in your dreams. But you'll also know that each mission you complete saves lives. The terrorist leader you eliminate won't be able to plan the bombing that would have killed hundreds of people. The weapons dealer you stop won't be able to supply the materials for a chemical attack." As her training entered its final phase, Sarah was required to complete a series of tests that would determine whether she was ready for operational deployment. These tests simulated real missions with full operational planning, extended fieldwork, and live-fire exercises using targets that were indistinguishable from human beings. Her final test took place in a scenario designed to replicate conditions in Afghanistan. Sarah was given intelligence about a high-value target located in a compound surrounded by civilian buildings. She had to plan and execute a mission where she would need to eliminate the target without harming civilians and without being detected by enemy forces. The test required her to spend 3 days in the field, living off minimal supplies while conducting surveillance and waiting for the perfect shot opportunity. When the moment came, she had to make a shot at over 1,200 meters through a window barely larger than her target's head, while accounting for crosswinds and the presence of civilians in the area. Sarah made the shot on her first attempt. The instructors later told her that she had achieved a level of precision that only a handful of people in the world could match. 2 weeks later, Sarah Mitchell officially graduated from a program that didn't exist. She received no diploma, no ceremony, and no recognition. Instead, she was given a new identity, a cover story, and orders for her first operational deployment. According to her official military records, Private Sarah Mitchell was still serving as a communications specialist at Fort Gordon, Georgia, where she was earning routine performance evaluations and attending technical training courses. In reality, she was about to become one of the most lethal weapons in America's undeclared arsenal, a ghost sniper whose existence was known only to a handful of people with the highest security clearances in the world. That Sarah's first operational deployment came with a passport bearing a name she had never heard before and a cover story she had practiced until it felt like her own memories. According to her new identity documents, she was Jessica Chun, a freelance photographer specializing in conflict zones and human interest stories. Her photography skills had been rapidly developed during the final weeks of training, along with a portfolio of work that would withstand professional scrutiny. The mission briefing took place in an unmarked office building in Washington, D.C. Agent Morrison, the woman who had recruited Sarah from sniper school, provided the operational details with the same matter-of-fact tone she might have used to discuss the weather. Your target is Khalil Hassan, a weapons broker operating out of Peshawar, Pakistan, Morrison explained while displaying satellite photographs and intelligence reports. Hassan specializes in providing advanced explosives to terrorist organizations operating in Afghanistan. Our intelligence indicates he's currently negotiating to supply materials for a series of coordinated attacks planned against U.S. bases. The photographs showed a bearded man in his 40s who ran what appeared to be a legitimate import-export business. Hassan's compound was located in a crowded commercial district where conventional military action would be impossible without massive civilian casualties. Pakistani authorities couldn't move against him because he was protected by corrupt officials who profited from his operations. Hassan follows a predictable routine, Morrison continued. Every Friday morning, he meets with his accountant in an office on the 3rd floor of a building across from the central mosque. The meeting always lasts exactly 1 hour, and Hassan always sits in the same chair by the window. Sarah studied the architectural plans and satellite imagery of the target area. The shot would need to be made from a building approximately 800 meters away, through an urban environment with multiple obstacles and potential complications. Wind patterns in the area were unpredictable due to the irregular spacing of buildings. Local assets have identified a suitable shooting position, Morrison explained. A photography studio on the top floor of an apartment building that provides clear line of sight to Hassan's meeting location. The studio is operated by one of our contacts, who will provide you with legitimate cover for being in the area. Sarah's extraction plan was deceptively simple. After taking the shot, she would disassemble her rifle and pack it into a camera case that appeared to contain photography equipment. She would then leave the building as Jessica Chun, the photographer, and make her way to a safe house where she would be picked up by local assets for transport to the airport. This is a high-priority target, Morrison emphasized. Our intelligence indicates that Hassan's next weapons delivery could enable attacks that would kill dozens of American soldiers. However, you'll be operating without backup and with minimal support. If something goes wrong, we can't send a rescue team. Sarah flew to Islamabad using her photographer cover story and spent 2 days establishing her credentials with local contacts who believe she was working on a documentary about urban life in Pakistan. She visited mosques, markets, and cultural sites while photographing everything with professional competence that impressed her guides. The photography studio where she would take the shot belonged to a man named Rashid who ran a legitimate business while occasionally providing services to American intelligence. Rashid believed Jessica Chun was a CIA operative gathering intelligence on terrorist financing. He didn't know her real identity or the true nature of her mission. Sarah spent hours familiarizing herself with the shooting position, calculating distances, and studying the environmental factors that would affect her shot. The window where Hassan conducted his meetings was clearly visible, but the shot would be complicated by the presence of civilians in the area and the need for absolute precision. On Thursday evening, Sarah assembled her rifle in the privacy of her hotel room. The weapon had been delivered to her in 3 separate packages that appeared to contain photography equipment. The rifle itself was a heavily modified M24 system with a specialized scope and suppressor that would muffle the sound of her shot. Friday morning arrived with clear skies and light winds. Sarah arrived at the photography studio carrying what appeared to be a large camera case. Rashid showed her to the window that overlooked Hassan's meeting location and then discreetly left her alone. Sarah set up her shooting position with the methodical precision she had learned during training. She calculated the exact distance to the target window using a laser rangefinder disguised as a photography light meter. She estimated wind speed by observing the movement of flags and loose papers in the street below. She verified her calculations multiple times because she would have only one opportunity to take the shot. At 10:47 a.m., Khalil Hassan entered the office building across the street. Sarah tracked his movement through the scope as he climbed the stairs and entered the accountant's office. At exactly 11 a.m., Hassan took his usual seat by the window. Through her scope, Sarah could see Hassan clearly as he reviewed documents with his accountant. He appeared to be conducting routine business, completely unaware that he was being observed from 800 meters away. Sarah controlled her breathing, steadied her position, and waited for the perfect moment. The shot had to be taken when Hassan was positioned directly in front of the window, with no civilians visible in the background, and with minimal risk of the bullet continuing through the window into other occupied areas of the building. Sarah waited patiently as Hassan moved around the office, occasionally sitting in the targeted chair, but never remaining still long enough for the shot. At 11:23 a.m., Hassan returned to his chair and began writing in a ledger book. His position was perfect, directly centered in front of the window with no one else visible in the office. Sarah made her final calculations, adjusted her aim point by a few millimeters to account for a slight crosswind, and gently squeezed the trigger. The bullet traveled the 800 meters to its target in less than 1 second. Hassan never heard the shot that killed him. From Sarah's perspective, she saw him simply slump forward onto the desk. The accountant, who had been facing away from the window, turned around to find Hassan motionless with a small entry wound in his forehead. Sarah immediately began disassembling her rifle while watching through her scope as confusion developed in the building across the street. The accountant was shaking Hassan's body, apparently trying to wake him. It would be several minutes before anyone realized that Hassan had been shot from a distance. By the time Pakistani police arrived at Hassan's office building, Sarah had already left the photography studio and was walking through the crowded market district carrying what appeared to be camera equipment. She spent an hour taking photographs of market vendors and street scenes, establishing an alibi that would show she had been conducting legitimate photography work. The local news reports described Hassan's death as a mysterious medical incident. The small entry wound was initially attributed to a possible stroke or heart attack. It wasn't until an autopsy was performed the following day that authorities discovered Hassan had been shot with a high-powered rifle. By the time the investigation began, Jessica Chun had already departed Pakistan on a commercial flight to Istanbul. Sarah was back in the United States within 72 hours of taking her first operational shot. The mission debrief took place in the same unmarked office building where Sarah had received her initial briefing. Agent Morrison reviewed every aspect of the operation while analyzing photographs and intelligence reports that had been gathered after Hassan's death. Hassan's weapons supply network collapsed immediately after his elimination, Morrison reported. Our intelligence indicates that 3 planned attacks against U.S. forces had to be postponed indefinitely because the necessary explosive materials couldn't be obtained. Sarah had successfully completed her first assassination mission, but the psychological impact was more significant than she had anticipated. During training, she had learned to manage the stress of shooting at human-shaped targets. The reality of killing an actual person was different in ways that her preparation hadn't fully addressed. Hassan had been a legitimate military target whose elimination had prevented attacks against American soldiers. Sarah understood the logic and necessity of her mission. But she also found herself thinking about Hassan's family, about the accountant who had witnessed his death, and about the people in Hassan's life who would never know why he had died. Agent Morrison seemed to understand Sarah's psychological state without needing to discuss it directly. The first mission is always the most difficult, she said. You'll always remember your first target. But You need to focus on what you prevented rather than what you did. Hassan was responsible for supplying explosives that had already killed dozens of people. By eliminating him, you saved lives that we'll never be able to count. Sarah's second mission came 6 weeks later. This time her target was a human trafficker operating out of Eastern Europe who specialized in transporting children for sexual exploitation. The mission required Sarah to pose as a graduate student conducting research on economic development in the former Soviet Union. The operational environment was more challenging than Pakistan. Sarah's target, Viktor Kozlov, operated from a heavily guarded compound in rural Ukraine. The shot would need to be made at a distance of over 1,200 meters, in sub-freezing weather conditions that would affect her rifle's performance. Sarah spent 2 weeks in Ukraine establishing her academic cover story while conducting surveillance on Kozlov's compound. She learned his routines, identified the best shooting position, and planned an extraction route through the frozen countryside. The shot itself was one of the most technically challenging she had ever attempted. The extreme distance, combined with crosswinds and sub-zero temperatures, required calculations that pushed her skills to their limits. When the moment came, Sarah made the shot on her first attempt, eliminating Kozlov while he stood on a balcony outside his office. Kozlov's death disrupted a trafficking network that had been responsible for transporting hundreds of children across Eastern Europe. The compound was raided by Ukrainian authorities 3 days later, leading to the rescue of 18 children who had been held there. Sarah's third mission took her to Somalia, where her target was a warlord who had been preventing humanitarian aid from reaching refugee camps. Her fourth mission was in Yemen, where she eliminated a bomb maker who had been developing new IED technologies for terrorist organizations. With each successful mission, Sarah's reputation within the Shadow organization grew. Her code name became Ghost 7, and her operational record began to attract attention from the highest levels of the intelligence community. She had demonstrated the ability to eliminate high-value targets in challenging environments with minimal support and zero mission failures. But Sarah's most significant mission came 8 months after her first deployment. The target was Dr. Ahmad Rashid, a biochemist who had been developing biological weapons for a terrorist organization known as the Islamic Dawn. Rashid was considered one of the most dangerous individuals in the world because his expertise could enable attacks that would kill thousands of people. The mission briefing revealed that Rashid was operating from a laboratory hidden within a civilian hospital in Syria. Intelligence indicated that he was close to completing work on an airborne pathogen that could be deployed against civilian populations in major cities. This is a time-sensitive mission, Agent Morrison explained. Our sources indicate that Rashid plans to complete his work within the next 2 weeks. Once he finishes developing the weapon, he'll disappear into the terrorist underground where we won't be able to locate him. The operational environment was the most dangerous Sarah had yet encountered. Syria was in the middle of a civil war, with multiple armed factions controlling different areas around the target location. Sarah would need to infiltrate a war zone, locate a target hidden within a functioning hospital, and extract without being captured by any of the various military forces in the area. Sarah's cover story was that of a medical aid worker with an international humanitarian organization. The organization was legitimate and actually was providing medical services in Syria, but they had been infiltrated by intelligence assets who could provide Sarah with authentic credentials and access to the target area. The shooting position would be the roof of a bombed-out building approximately 600 meters from the hospital where Rashid worked. The building had been abandoned due to damage from artillery strikes, but it still provided a clear line of sight to Rashid's laboratory window. Sarah spent 3 days moving through Syria while maintaining her medical aid worker cover. She provided legitimate medical assistance to refugees and civilians while gathering intelligence on Rashid's routines and security procedures. She learned that Rashid rarely left his laboratory and that his only predictable activity was a daily meeting with hospital administrators that took place in an office with an unprotected window. On her 4th day in Syria, Sarah made her way to the abandoned building that would serve as her shooting position. The structure had been severely damaged by bombing, but the upper floors were still accessible and provided the elevation she needed for her shot. The shot itself would be complicated by the presence of civilians in the hospital and the need to avoid hitting any medical equipment that might contain dangerous chemicals. Sarah had to wait for a moment when Rashid was isolated in the office with no other people visible in the area. At 2:17 p.m., Rashid entered the administrator's office alone. Sarah could see him clearly through her scope as he reviewed documents at a desk positioned directly in front of the window. The distance was 584 meters, with minimal wind and clear visibility. Sarah made her calculations, controlled her breathing, and took the shot. Dr. Ahmad Rashid was killed instantly by a bullet that struck him in the head while he sat at his desk reviewing production schedules for biological weapons. His death ended a biological weapons program that could have killed thousands of people and prevented the Islamic Dawn organization from acquiring the most dangerous weapon they had ever attempted to develop. Sarah's extraction from Syria was complicated by increased security around the hospital following Rashid's death. She had to remain in character as a medical aid worker for an additional 48 hours while various armed factions investigated the assassination. She eventually made her way to the Turkish border and flew back to the United States using her humanitarian worker credentials. By the end of her first year of operational deployment, Sarah had completed 7 missions with a perfect success record. She had eliminated targets in 6 different countries without ever being identified or detected. Her skills had been tested in urban environments, rural areas, war zones, and peaceful regions. Each mission had required different cover stories, shooting positions, and extraction methods. But Sarah's reputation for precision and reliability was about to bring her to the attention of the most elite units in the American military. Her next mission would place her alongside the Navy SEALs in Afghanistan, where her skills would be put to the ultimate test, and where a moment of unprecedented recognition would change her life forever. The mission briefing that would change Sarah's career forever took place in a secure facility at Bagram Airfield in Afghanistan. For the first time since beginning her operational deployment, she found herself in a room with active military personnel who knew exactly what she was and what she could do. The atmosphere was different from her previous briefings. These men understood precision shooting at a level that intelligence agents never could. Commander Jake Viking Morrison was a 15-year veteran of the Navy SEALs who had led more high-value target missions than almost anyone in the special operations community. He was exactly the kind of warrior that Sarah had imagined when she first enlisted, tall, powerfully built, with the quiet confidence that came from surviving countless life-or-death situations. Ghost 7, he said, using Sarah's operational code name. We've been following your work. 7 missions, 7 kills, 0 failures. That's the kind of precision we need for what we're planning. The mission was unlike anything Sarah had previously undertaken. Intelligence had located Mahmoud al-Zawahiri, a senior al-Qaeda leader who was coordinating attacks against NATO forces from a compound in the mountains near the Pakistan border. Al-Zawahiri was considered one of the most important terrorist leaders still operating in the region, but his location was so heavily defended that a conventional assault would likely fail with heavy casualties. The target compound is built into a mountainside, Commander Morrison explained while pointing to detailed architectural drawings and satellite imagery. It's surrounded by multiple defensive positions, and our intelligence indicates at least 40 armed fighters are providing security. A direct assault would require significant air support and would almost certainly result in heavy casualties on both sides. The SEAL team had developed an alternative plan that would rely on Sarah's unique capabilities. They would establish observation positions around the compound and wait for an opportunity when al-Zawahiri could be engaged from extreme distance without alerting his security forces. Sarah would make the shot from a position over 1,400 meters away, using terrain features to remain completely hidden from the target compound. This is the longest shot we've ever planned, Commander Morrison continued. The distance alone makes it almost impossible, but we also have to account for altitude, wind patterns that change constantly in the mountains, and the fact that you'll get only one opportunity. If you miss, or if the shot doesn't produce an immediate kill, al-Zawahiri will disappear underground, and we'll never get another chance. Sarah studied the topographical maps and weather reports while considering the technical challenges involved. The shot would be at the extreme range of her rifle system, requiring perfect conditions and calculations that accounted for factors she had never encountered at such distances. The target area was at an altitude of over 8,000 feet, where thinner air would affect her bullet's trajectory. Mountain wind patterns were notoriously unpredictable and could change direction and speed without warning. What's my backup plan if environmental conditions make the shot impossible? Sarah asked. There is no backup plan, Commander Morrison replied. If you can't make the shot, we abort the mission and al-Zawahiri continues planning attacks that will kill American soldiers. This is our only realistic option for eliminating this target. The SEAL team that Sarah would be working with consisted of 6 operators, each with extensive combat experience in Afghanistan. They had been briefed about her capabilities but had never worked with a female operative, and certainly had never worked with someone whose background was as classified as Sarah's. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Tank Williams was the team's senior enlisted leader and had initially been skeptical about working with an unknown sniper. During the mission planning sessions, he tested Sarah's knowledge with technical questions about long-range shooting, environmental calculations, and equipment reliability. "What's your contingency if your primary rifle malfunctions?" he asked during one planning session. "I don't carry a backup rifle for shots at this distance," Sarah replied. "If the primary weapon fails, the mission fails. But I inspect and maintain my equipment personally, and I've never had a mechanical failure during an operational shot." Tank studied her with the kind of intensity that experienced soldiers use to evaluate new team members. "You've really made shots at distances over 1,200 meters?" "7 times, Sarah said quietly. "Different weapons, different environments, different conditions. The longest was 1,247 meters in Ukraine, sub-zero temperatures with crosswinds." The respect in Tank's expression was immediate and unmistakable. He had been a military sniper before joining the SEALs, and he understood exactly how difficult such shots were. The insertion into the target area required a nighttime helicopter flight through mountain terrain that was constantly monitored by Taliban forces. Sarah and the SEAL team were transported in a modified Black Hawk that used advanced noise suppression technology to minimize the sound of their approach. The landing zone was a small clearing approximately 8 kilometers from the target compound. Sarah and the SEALs would need to move through rugged mountain terrain, carrying full equipment loads, while avoiding Taliban patrols that regularly moved through the area. Sarah carried her rifle system in a specialized case that appeared to contain survey equipment, maintaining her cover story as a cartographer conducting mapping work for the Afghan government. Her actual shooting position would be on a ridge that overlooked the target compound from a distance that would require every bit of her skill and experience. The movement to the shooting position took 12 hours through some of the most difficult terrain Sarah had ever encountered. The team moved only at night, hiding during daylight hours in carefully selected positions that provided concealment from both ground observation and aerial surveillance. During the daylight hide, Sarah had her first extended conversation with the SEAL team members. They were curious about her background and operational history, but they respected the classified nature of her work and asked only general questions about her training and experience. "How did you learn to shoot at these distances?" asked Lieutenant David Hawk Patterson, the team's officer. "Started hunting with my grandfather when I was 12, Sarah replied. "Turned out I had a natural ability for it. The military developed that ability into something useful." "Where are you from originally?" Tank asked. "Iowa," Sarah said. "Farm country. Lots of wide-open spaces for practicing long shots." The SEALs exchanged glances that suggested they were having trouble reconciling the image of a farm girl from Iowa with the reputation of Ghost 7, the sniper who had eliminated high-value targets across multiple continents. On the second night, the team reached the ridge that would serve as Sarah's shooting position. The location provided a clear line of sight to the target compound while offering excellent concealment and multiple escape routes. Sarah spent hours studying the target area through high-powered spotting scopes, while calculating the environmental factors that would affect her shot. The distance to the compound was 1,387 meters, longer than any shot she had attempted during training or operational missions. The altitude was affecting her breathing and would also impact her rifle's performance. Wind patterns in the valley were complex and unpredictable, changing direction as air currents moved around the mountain peaks. Sarah's rifle system had been specially configured for this mission with the most advanced optics and ammunition available. The rifle itself was a .50 caliber system capable of extreme range accuracy, and the ammunition was match-grade rounds that had been selected specifically for high-altitude performance. On the third day of observation, al-Zawahiri appeared in the compound. Intelligence had been correct about his presence, but wrong about his routines. Instead of maintaining a predictable schedule, al-Zawahiri moved around the compound randomly and was never exposed in shooting positions for more than a few seconds at a time. Sarah tracked al-Zawahiri's movements through her scope while waiting for a shot opportunity that might never come. She needed him to remain stationary for at least 15 seconds in a location where she could ensure a clean shot without risking civilian casualties. On the fourth day, Sarah noticed a pattern in al-Zawahiri's behavior. Every morning at approximately 6:30 a.m., he would climb to the roof of the main building and spend several minutes observing the surrounding mountains through binoculars. The exposure time was brief, but it was the only predictable opportunity for a shot. "I can take him tomorrow morning," Sarah told Commander Morrison during their evening communications check. "He has a routine of going to the roof just after sunrise. The exposure time is less than 60 seconds, but that's enough if conditions are right." "What do you need from us?" Morrison asked. "Complete silence from your positions. Any movement or sound that could alter wind patterns in the valley might affect my shot. And I need someone with a spotting scope to call environmental changes while I'm focused on the target." Tank volunteered to serve as Sarah's spotter, a role that would require him to lie motionless beside her while making precise observations about wind conditions, lighting changes, and target movement. It was a position of absolute trust. Tank would be responsible for providing information that could mean the difference between mission success and failure. The morning of the shot arrived with clear skies and relatively calm winds. Sarah and Tank were in position before sunrise, with her rifle system fully configured and all calculations double-checked. The other SEAL team members had established overwatch positions that would provide security while remaining far enough away to avoid affecting the shot. At 6:28 a.m., Al-Zawahiri appeared on the roof of the compound building. Sarah tracked him through her scope while Tank provided updates on wind conditions and environmental factors. Al-Zawahiri was moving around the roof area, occasionally stopping to observe different sections of the surrounding mountains. "Winds picking up from the southwest," Tank whispered. "Maybe 8 knots, gusting to 12. Sarah adjusted her aim point to compensate for the crosswind while waiting for Al-Zawahiri to stop moving. She needed him to remain still long enough for her to complete her shooting sequence. Final aim adjustment, breathing control, trigger squeeze, and follow-through. At 6:31 a.m., Al-Zawahiri stopped moving and raised his binoculars to study something in the mountains to the north. His position was perfect, standing upright with no obstructions, clearly silhouetted against the morning sky. "Target stationary," Tank whispered. "Wind steady at 8 knots southwest." Sarah made her final calculations and settled into her shooting position. The distance was 1,387 meters, the longest operational shot she had ever attempted. The altitude, wind conditions, and morning light all had to be factored into her aim point. She controlled her breathing, steadied her position, and gently squeezed the trigger. The bullet traveled for nearly 2 seconds before reaching its target. Sarah watched through her scope as Al-Zawahiri suddenly collapsed on the roof of the building. The shot had been perfect, a kill at a distance that few people in the world could have achieved. "Target down," Tank confirmed through his spotting scope. "Clean kill shot. Target is not moving." The compound immediately erupted in chaos as security forces tried to understand what had happened to their leader. From their perspective, Al-Zawahiri had simply collapsed without warning while standing alone on the roof. The extreme distance of the shot meant that they never heard the rifle report or saw any indication of where it had come from. Sarah began disassembling her rifle system while the SEAL team prepared for extraction. The mission had been a complete success. Al-Zawahiri had been eliminated without alerting his security forces to the presence of American forces in the area. The extraction required another 2 days of movement through mountain terrain, but the team reached their pickup point without encountering enemy forces. By the time Taliban fighters began searching for the source of the shot that had killed Al-Zawahiri, Sarah and the SEAL team were already back at Bagram Airfield. The mission debrief took place the following day in the same secure facility where Sarah had first met the SEAL team. Commander Morrison reviewed every aspect of the operation while analyzing intelligence reports about the aftermath of Al-Zawahiri's death. "The target's death has caused significant disruption to Al-Qaeda operations in this region," Morrison reported. "Our intelligence indicates that at least 3 planned attacks have been canceled because the coordination structure collapsed with Al-Zawahiri's elimination." But the most significant moment of the debrief came when Commander Morrison addressed Sarah directly. "Ghost 7, I've been leading special operations teams for 15 years. I've worked with the best snipers in every branch of the military. What you accomplished on this mission was extraordinary. That shot was at the absolute limits of what's technically possible, and you made it look routine." Morrison paused and looked directly at Sarah with an expression of genuine respect. "I want to offer you something that has never been offered to someone with your background. My team is being tasked with a series of missions that will require your specific skill set. These will be joint operations where you'll be working directly with SEAL team members as an integrated part of our operational capability." Sarah realized that she was being invited to join the most elite units in the American military on a permanent basis. It was an opportunity that would take her operational work to a completely different level, but it would also mean giving up the anonymity and independence that had defined her career to that point. What would my role be? Sarah asked. You'd be our precision asset, Morrison replied. When we encounter situations that require elimination of targets at extreme distances or in environments where conventional assault isn't possible, you'd provide the capability that makes those missions achievable. Sarah considered the implications while studying the faces of the SEAL team members who had become her colleagues over the past week. These were men who represented the absolute pinnacle of military professionalism, and they were offering to accept her as an equal partner in operations that would define American special operations capabilities. I accept, she said. What Sarah didn't know was that her acceptance would lead to a moment of recognition that would become legendary among special operations forces. A moment when her skills and dedication would be acknowledged in a way that broke every protocol and tradition in the military hierarchy. A moment when a SEAL commander would salute a woman with no visible rank, no name tag, and no official recognition. Because sometimes, respect transcends all regulations. The mission that would lead to the most unprecedented moment in modern military history began with intelligence that sent shockwaves through the entire special operations community. Osama bin Hamza, the son of Osama bin Laden and heir to al-Qaeda leadership, had been located in a compound near the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. Unlike previous high-value targets, bin Hamza was surrounded by a security force that included former military personnel and sophisticated detection equipment that made conventional assault nearly impossible. Sarah had been working with Commander Morrison's SEAL team for 6 months, completing 12 joint operations with a perfect mission record. Her integration with the team had been seamless. The SEALs had come to rely on her capabilities as much as they relied on each other. But the bin Hamza mission would test every skill she had developed and push her abilities beyond anything she had previously attempted. The intelligence briefing took place in a heavily secured facility at Joint Special Operations Command Headquarters. Sarah found herself in a room with some of the most senior military leaders in the special operations community, including General Patricia Hayes, the first woman to command special operations forces in the region. This target represents the future leadership of al-Qaeda, General Hayes explained while displaying detailed intelligence reports. Our sources indicate that bin Hamza is planning to restructure the organization and launch a new wave of attacks against Western targets. His elimination would be strategically significant, but the operational environment makes this one of the most challenging missions we've ever planned. The compound where bin Hamza was located had been specifically designed to prevent the kind of precision operations that had killed his father. The buildings were constructed with thick concrete walls that could stop small arms fire. The compound was surrounded by multiple layers of security, including electronic sensors and heavily armed guards. Most significantly, the compound was located in a valley where the surrounding mountains limited approach routes and provided natural defensive advantages. Commander Morrison presented the tactical plan that his team had developed. Traditional assault methods won't work against this target. The compound's defenses are too sophisticated, and the security force is too large. Our only viable option is a precision elimination from extreme distance, followed by immediate extraction before enemy forces can respond. Sarah studied the operational plans while considering the technical challenges involved. The shot would need to be taken from a ridge approximately 1,800 meters from the target compound, farther than any operational shot in military history. The extreme distance would require perfect environmental conditions and calculations that pushed beyond the limits of current sniper technology. The shot distance alone makes this mission nearly impossible, Sarah said after reviewing the plans. But we also have to consider that the target will only be exposed for brief periods. The mountain environment will create unpredictable wind conditions, and we'll have no opportunity for a follow-up shot if the first one fails. General Hayes looked directly at Sarah with an expression that conveyed the weight of the decision they were asking her to make. Ghost 7, we understand the challenges involved. If you determine that this mission isn't technically feasible, we'll accept that assessment and look for alternative approaches. But if there's any possibility that you can make this shot, we need to attempt it. Our intelligence indicates that bin Hamza is planning to leave the compound within the next 2 weeks, and we may never get another opportunity. Sarah requested 48 hours to analyze the mission parameters and determine whether the shot was technically possible. She spent those hours studying ballistics data, environmental reports, and equipment specifications while running calculations that had never been attempted for an operational mission. The technical challenges were staggering. At 1,800 meters, her bullet would be in flight for over 3 seconds, during which time even slight changes in wind conditions could cause the shot to miss by several feet. The mountain environment would create complex air currents that could change direction and speed unpredictably. The target would be visible for less than 60 seconds during his daily routine, providing minimal time for final calculations and shot execution. But Sarah also realized that the mission was technically possible under perfect conditions. If the environmental factors aligned correctly, and if her calculations were precise, she could make the shot. The margin for error would be essentially zero, but the shot was within the theoretical capabilities of her rifle system and her own skills. "I can make the shot," she told General Hayes during their follow-up meeting. "But everything has to be perfect. Weather conditions, wind patterns, equipment performance, and target behavior all have to align exactly as planned. If any single factor is different from our predictions, the mission will fail." The mission was approved with the understanding that success depended on factors largely beyond human control. Sarah and the SEAL team would establish positions around the target compound and wait for optimal conditions that might never occur. The insertion into the target area required the most complex infiltration operation that Sarah had ever participated in. The team was transported by helicopter to a landing zone over 20 kilometers from the target, then moved through mountain terrain for 3 days while avoiding Taliban patrols and electronic surveillance systems. Sarah's shooting position was located on a ridge that provided clear line of sight to the target compound while offering excellent concealment and defensive positions. The location had been selected using satellite imagery and computer modeling, but the actual conditions were even more challenging than the planning had indicated. The shooting position was at an altitude of over 9,000 feet, where the thin air affected both human performance and ballistics calculations. The ridge was exposed to wind patterns that changed constantly as air currents moved around the mountain peaks. The distance to the target compound was 1,847 meters, even farther than the mission planners had calculated. Sarah spent 4 days establishing her shooting position and conducting detailed observations of the target compound. Ben Hamza's routines were more irregular than intelligence reports had indicated. Instead of maintaining a predictable schedule, he varied his activities and rarely exposed himself in locations where a long-range shot would be possible. On the 5th day of observation, Sarah identified a potential shot opportunity. Every morning between 7:15 and 7:30 a.m., Ben Hamza would briefly appear on a balcony outside his office to observe weather conditions. The exposure time was less than 30 seconds, but it was the only predictable moment when he was visible from her shooting position. Tank, who was serving as her spotter, had been tracking environmental conditions throughout their observation period. "Wind patterns are most stable in the early morning," he reported. "We get about a 15-minute window when conditions might be suitable for the shot." Sarah calculated that she would need winds of less than 5 knots with minimal gusting to have any chance of success at the extreme distance. Mountain weather was notoriously unpredictable, but the early morning period offered the best possibility for the stable conditions she required. On the morning of the 6th day, environmental conditions were nearly perfect. The wind was calm, visibility was excellent, and weather reports indicated stable conditions for the next several hours. Sarah and Tank were in position before sunrise, with her rifle system configured for the longest shot she had ever attempted. At 7:17 a.m., Ben Hamza appeared on the balcony outside his office. Sarah tracked him through her scope, while Tank provided updates on environmental conditions. The distance was 1,847 meters, so far that she could barely see details of her target even through her high-powered scope. "Winds calm," Tank whispered. "Less than 3 knots, steady direction." Sarah made her final calculations while Ben Hamza moved around the small balcony area. The bullet would need to travel for over 3 seconds, during which time the Earth's rotation would affect the trajectory. She had to account for the extreme altitude, the morning temperature, and wind conditions that could change during the bullet's flight time. At 7:19 a.m., Ben Hamza stopped moving and stepped to the edge of the balcony, where he was clearly silhouetted against the morning sky. Sarah knew she had perhaps 10 seconds before he would move again or return inside the building. She controlled her breathing, made her final aim adjustment, and gently squeezed the trigger. The bullet traveled for 3.2 seconds before reaching its target. Sarah watched through her scope as bin Hamza suddenly collapsed on the balcony. The shot had been perfect, a kill at a distance that exceeded every previous record for operational sniper fire. Target down. Tank confirmed through his spotting scope. Clean kill shot at 1,847 meters. Holy shit, Ghost. You just made the impossible shot. The compound erupted in confusion as security forces tried to understand what had happened to their leader. From their perspective, bin Hamza had simply collapsed without warning while standing alone on a secure balcony inside a heavily defended facility. The extreme distance of the shot meant they had no indication that enemy forces were even in the area. Sarah began disassembling her rifle system while the SEAL team prepared for immediate extraction. The mission had been a complete success, but the significance of what she had accomplished wouldn't be fully understood until later analysis confirmed the shot distance and conditions. The extraction required 36 hours of movement through hostile territory, but the team reached their pickup point without encountering enemy forces. By the time Taliban and al-Qaeda fighters began searching for the source of the shot that had killed bin Hamza, Sarah and the SEAL team were already airborne and heading back to base. The mission debrief took place at Bagram Airfield in the same secure facility where Sarah had first been introduced to special operations work. General Hayes had flown in personally to review the operation and assess its strategic impact. The elimination of bin Hamza has caused the complete collapse of al-Qaeda's succession planning, General Hayes reported. Our intelligence indicates that the organization's leadership structure has been thrown into chaos, and several regional commanders are fighting for control. This single mission may have prevented the reorganization of al-Qaeda under unified leadership. But the most significant part of the debrief focused on the technical aspects of Sarah's shot. Ballistics analysis confirmed that she had achieved a kill at 1,847 meters under challenging environmental conditions. The shot had exceeded every previous record for operational sniper fire and had been accomplished with equipment that was already at the limits of its technical capabilities. Ghost 7, General Hayes said, what you accomplished on this mission was beyond extraordinary. You made a shot that most experts would have declared impossible. The ballistics team has confirmed that you achieved precision at a distance that exceeds the theoretical capabilities of your equipment under the conditions you faced. Commander Morrison stood up and looked directly at Sarah with an expression of profound respect. In 15 years of special operations, I've never seen anything that compares to what you just accomplished. You eliminated the most important terrorist target of this generation with a shot that will be studied by military historians for decades. What happened next was completely unprecedented in modern military history. Commander Morrison, a hardened veteran who had never shown deference to anyone except superior officers, slowly raised his hand to his forehead in a crisp military salute. He was saluting a woman who wore no visible rank insignia, no name tag, no unit patches, and no indication of official military status. The entire room fell silent. General Hayes, Tank, and every other person present watched in stunned silence as one of the most respected SEAL commanders in the military rendered a perfect salute to someone who officially didn't exist. Ma'am, Commander Morrison said with absolute sincerity, it has been an honor serving with you. Sarah, who had spent years operating in the shadows without recognition or acknowledgement, found herself overwhelmed by the gesture. She had never sought praise or public recognition, but this moment of respect from a warrior she admired was more meaningful than any medal or official commendation could have been. She returned the salute with the same precision and respect that Commander Morrison had shown her. The moment lasted only a few seconds, but word of it spread throughout the Special Operations community with remarkable speed. Within weeks, every SEAL team, Delta Force unit, and Special Operations Group had heard the story of Ghost 7, the female sniper who had made the impossible shot and earned a salute from Viking Morrison. Sarah's operational career continued for 2 more years, during which she completed another 18 missions with perfect success. Her reputation grew to legendary status among those with the security clearances necessary to know about her work. She became the standard against which all precision shooting was measured. But the moment that defined her legacy was that unprecedented salute from a SEAL commander who recognized excellence regardless of rank, gender, or official status. It was a moment that proved that true respect is earned through performance, dedication, and results rather than through titles or recognition. When Sarah finally retired from operational duty, she returned to Iowa where she used her GI Bill benefits to complete college and eventually became a teacher in the same school district where she had grown up. Her students knew her as Ms. Mitchell, a quiet woman who taught mathematics with extraordinary patience and precision. They never knew that their teacher had once been considered the most lethal sniper in American military history. They never knew that she had eliminated terrorist leaders across 3 continents with shots that defied physical possibility. And they certainly never knew that a Navy SEAL commander had once rendered a perfect military salute to her in recognition of service that had saved countless lives. Sarah kept only one memento from her operational career, a photograph taken at the moment Commander Morrison saluted her. She never displayed it publicly and never spoke about its significance. But on difficult days, when the memories of her service weighed heavily on her conscience, she would look at that photograph and remember that her sacrifices had been witnessed and honored by people who understood their importance. The world never learned the name of Ghost 7. The history books never recorded her achievements. The medals and commendations she earned remained classified in files that would never be released to the public. But in the warrior community of America's most elite forces, her legend lived on. New snipers learned about the impossible shots she had made. SEAL teams told stories about the woman who had operated alongside them with skills that exceeded their own. And somewhere in the mountains of Afghanistan, Taliban fighters still told stories about targets who died from shots that came from nowhere, fired by a ghost who was never seen and never caught. Some legends are written in stone. Others are written in the memories of those who witnessed greatness in person. Sarah Mitchell's legacy belonged to the second category, a legend known only to those who had earned the right to know it. The salute that Commander Morrison had given her wasn't just recognition of her individual achievements. It was acknowledgement that sometimes the most important service is performed by people the world will never know about, in conflicts that will never be officially acknowledged, for victories that can never be publicly celebrated. In the end, Sarah Mitchell proved that heroism doesn't require recognition, that excellence doesn't need publicity, and that sometimes the most powerful salute is given to someone whose name will never appear in any history book. Her story remains classified, her achievements remain secret, and her identity remains hidden. But somewhere in the files of America's intelligence agencies, the record shows 7 words that summarize one of the most remarkable military careers in modern history. Ghost 7. Mission success rate, 100%.